What's up, everyone? This is Tatum. I'm back with another episode of Fuck This Review, where today I'm going to be discussing Velvet Underground, the Velvet Underground, and Nico. That's such a weird album title to repeat when the band is named that. It's funny. I wanted to do a review on this album because it's one of the albums, for those who've seen my basically Rolling Stone list bashing video. This is a video an album that listened to when I went back and I used to like skim through Rolling Stone stuff to hear some of the greatest albums, quote unquote. And Velvet Underground stood out to me obviously because of the cover, Andy Warhol, and things of that nature. And it was one of the albums that I listened to when I was my late teens, early 20s, and I really enjoyed. So I wanted to listen to it again to see if it held up to the standards that I had back then. It's crazy. This album was made in 1967. I could be speaking out of turn here, but it sounds like one of the first indie pop, a little bit of grunge, a little bit kind of albums. And when I listened to it, I was like, oh shit, this is actually made in '67, which is it all. If you listen to some of my prior videos, it's always amazing to me when albums were like made in the '60s or '70s, and they just sound so new. And like, how did they even get to that? How did that inspiration even occur? The album cover alone is just like iconic in itself. The Andy Warhol banana, like that's just iconic in itself. And when I was doing back research on it, I found out that this album wasn't even received great. It didn't have great reviews when it first came out, and it sold a little bit of money. I mean, it sold a little bit of records, and they also had trouble finding backing for the album, say from a record company. So they would shop it to this record company and this record company, and everybody turned it down. I think MCA actually backed the album and like distributed. Is that the right word? Distributed it for them. So, and it's crazy to look back in hindsight because this record was actually great, and they like everybody was like, "No, that's whack. No, I don't want it. I don't want it." And it's like Andy Warhol's. He served as producer on the album. I've read it's a bunch of back and forth about how he produced it when he did produce the music, but he actually backed it with his money, his funding, and who gave his input on certain songs and things of that nature. And they used to play at like his warehouse. I don't know what it was called, but Andy Warhol's like big warehouse where he used to throw parties and art galleries and things of that nature. Back in the day, they were like the house band, so that was pretty cool. So I just wanted to go over a couple songs. Just to highlight it, give my review, my take on it a couple years later after listening to it in my teens and late early 20s. So let's get it started. After 5 years of being out, it only sold 30,000 copies. Like, I don't even think this album has a plaque like for any like for gold or platinum or anything like that. It sold 30,000 copies after it was released, and it goes to show that a record doesn't have to sell a lot of records to be considered great, like, and influential. Like, this is a prime example of that. Side note, I think I've read somewhere when I was a kid that Nico was was going deaf in one ear, and that constituted how she sunk her vocals and things of that nature. I could be making the whole thing up. If somebody has like an article, what do you call the thing that's like the Kazam thing? Yeah, it could be the Mandela effect, where I just made up this whole story about Nico's ear. The first song is Sunday Morning. I read it was the last song they recorded for the album because I think the record company is MCA, and they brought in a producer. I think Tom Wilson. I could be wrong about that, but they brought him in to perfect the album. He's a producer. They brought him in to just make things a little bit more polished, for lack of better words. To me, it's the brightest song of the album, subject-wise and just sound-wise. Even though I read the song thing was suggested by Andy Warhol, and he said, "Why don't you just make a song about paranoia?" And I was like, "Does this song really talk about paranoia like that?" Because like Sunday morning, like watch out, like it's very. I love the while they're singing, like it kind of transitions when Sunday morning, watch out and well behind you, like dun, 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 dun. Like it's the way the guitar switches. It's a really slight transition, but that part always stands out to me. It's sung in this like softened spoken voice, which just adds to the I don't know the painting of the record. Like it makes it like it sounds like Sunday morning. It sounds like you're waking up. It sounds like the beginning of something. And I think that's why I was put number one on the actual album to start the album off. And it sounded like it could have been a single. I'm not sure. I wasn't live. I don't know what the single is from this album, but it sounded like it could be a single as well, especially in 67. Like it sounds like right on the verge of those post Beatles records and things of that nature. That leads into Waiting for the Man. And one thing I did appreciate about this album, which probably turned a lot of people off in 67, was that it was discussing topics that just wasn't being talked about. Like I'm Waiting for the Man was just a record about waiting for your drug dealer, like your drug distributor. So it talks about, going up to Harlem and waiting for, quote unquote, the black man to sell you drugs and heroin. Heroin's a big topic on this whole album. Shows you how much drugs and everything was going on in Andy Warhol's little artsy cubby. Like he goes uptown and he say, "Hey white boy, what you doing uptown?" Like that line stood out to me. Like, could you imagine where they had to go to the places where the drugs were sold to get the drugs, and like they kind of seem out of place in those environments, especially uptown Harlem at the time. But the sound of it itself is just like this very bluesy. It reminds me of this bluesy, old vintage kind of rock and roll feel. That's what I got from it. If you got a different vibe, you can let me know in the comments. But that's what I got from it. It's just it's a cool record because you just didn't hear about these subjects on record back then, and it probably turned a lot of people off from the record, like I mentioned before. With other subjects they talked about on here, I just thought it was pretty cool. That leads into Femme Fatale. She's a femme fatale. She's such a little thing. I thought that was a great song because it kind of, for lack of better words, is like a women empowerment song. Like it's giving the women power. Like all these guys obsessing over her, and it's like you might not want to do that because she might just break you down and she might take your powers and things of that nature. You better off just staying away from her, kind of thing. The vibe I got from it. Like one of my favorite lines, which is my favorite line, but I'll just say it again, which is, "You're written in her book, you're number 37, have a look." And the way that Nico sung on the record, it was just cool. I think it added a different texture and vibe to the band. And I read somewhere down the line that I don't even think they liked her. Like, I think that was kind of an Andy Warhol kind of thing, like put her in the band, because they kind of kicked out the band once they disconnected from Andy Warhol, which was shortly after this. And I read stories about them having hard times like recording songs with her as well. So, but I do think she added a nice texture to the group in itself, especially with songs like Femme Fatale and All Tomorrow's Parties. Just her voice was just a different texture that I thought brought a different essence to the band. And it was a request. This song was a request by Andy Warhol in a tribute to, it was inspired by his muse Edie Sedgwick, who I guess was around in the warehouse around the time. She died young. I think she died like in her early 20s. So she inspired the lyrics for Femme Fatale, which would probably make sense because she was like, I guess for lack of better words, a model. Like she was just a model, the it girl of the Andy Warhol scene at the time. I don't know. If you know any backstory, let me know in the comments. That leads into Venus and Furs, and man, probably one of my favorite songs on the record. Just that instrumental and beat and production on that is just amazing. Like I could probably just listen to that instrumental and beat without any words. And that song topic is about S&M. Like the topics that they were speaking about. And then it makes me wonder what the hell was going on in Andy Warhol's warehouse. Do you remember on The Doors? Because I think this song was in the Doors movie when Jim Morrison first visited Andy Warhol's warehouse, and it was like just a bunch of wild shit going on. Like just wild shit. And it was what's the opening line when he said, "Shiny, shiny, shiny boots of leather, whiplash, girl child in the dark, comes in bells, your servant, don't forsake him, strike dear mistress and cure his heart." So like the subject matter is crazy for 67. They talking about S&M and whipping people, and like it's just a crazy subject. That's one of the things I was like, this is no wonder this album had to get like no recognition, because they wasn't even prepared for the subject matter that was at hand. Like you got to think it's still kind of in that Beatles, Rolling Stone kind of era where it's just poppy rock, and we're kind of getting out of that phase. But the world wasn't ready for this. But that instrumental and that beat itself is just insane. Even without the Doors movie, and I'm pretty sure it put a visual in my head, but even without it, I vision like a red room, like, and just filled with cigarette smoke, and it's a bunch of wild things going on. It's like a draggy, like that electric guitar in it is just magical. Like I rewind that song back so many times just to hear the instrumental. Like I said, I would just listen to the instrumental of that. It's a great production. There's no build up. Like it goes straight into it, boom, and then you just in it. Like it's no progression. You're just in it, and it's kind of like this hypnotizing force in a way. Love that song. You gotta run. Like that song's next. And that song just gives me like this classic rock and roll feel. That electric guitar. And it's some songs on here that remind me of Bob Dylan. And this is one of them. Just the way that the texture of his voice when he's singing and how he's singing and the flow of everything. It's very Bob Dylan like. The song itself is said that it's a tale of a bunch of characters in New York City, including Teenage Mary, just a bunch of characters who seeking and using drugs. Like drugs was a heavy theme on this album, as you can see. Like how much was heroin popping in '67? He was just shooting. Was that like after the Vietnam War when people was coming back from the war? Because there was a lot of heroin use being like they spoke on heroin a lot in this album. So much. They have a song called Heroin, but I'll get to that. That leads into All Tomorrow's Parties, which comes in with these thumping drums, and that piano is just crazy. And I love that song. That's probably one of the ones that stood in my mind throughout the years. To All Tomorrow's Parties. What is it? And what costume shall the poor girl wear to all tomorrow's parties? Hand-me-down dress from who knows where to all tomorrow's parties. And where will she go? And what shall she do when midnight comes around? She'll turn once more to Sunday's clown and cry behind the door. Like Nico didn't have great vocals, but her vocals did the job for me. Like it set the picture and everything. So again, that's one of the songs that always stood out to me over the years. And to me, that song is just, for lack of better words, maybe like a lost girl. I think of like Amy's fuck me pumps, like the girl she describes in that, like Amy Winehouse, that is. I just said Amy, like you supposed to know. Amy Winehouse fucking pumps. It just reminds me of that girl, who's just lost in the city life, like hand-me-down dresses from who knows where at all tomorrow's parties, and all this on Saturday, but she's Sunday's clown at the end because, like, where did she go at midnight? Like, it's a bunch of these questions, and I'm pretty sure a bunch of those females were prevalent in the 1967 Andy Warhol's compound. Yeah, see? The inspiration from this song, actually, Reed says it came from observing Andy Warhol's clique, and he said it was a very descriptive of certain people at the factory at the time. I guess Andy Warhol's warehouse was called the Factory. And he was like, he'll watch Andy Warhol and he'll watch everybody watching him, and he would hear people say astonishing things and crazy things and funny things, the saddest things. So one thing I did appreciate is that, not appreciate, but that I noticed besides the heroin theme, was that this album is pretty much a soundtrack to Andy Warhol's Factory. Like you could just tell that all these songs were inspired by that, and it was pretty fucking dope. That leads into Heroin, which I spoke about 1,000 times already. And that's another song that reminds me of a Bob Dylan just flow and vocals, and just everything about it sounds like Bob Dylan, especially when he says he put the spike into his vein. Like he's even saying it like that, and I like Bob Dylan. I wonder when critics and everybody heard it back then, did they think like this New York band was just mimicking already people who were already popped at the time, Bob Dylan? There's certain songs on here that may resemble the Beatles. There's certain songs on here that just, some old classic rock and roll. There's certain songs on here that does sound like it was a mimic of something, because he sounds just like Bob Dylan on Heroin. Like he just does. There's no other way around it. He sounds extremely like Bob Dylan on Heroin. Reed said he wrote the lyrics for the song while working at a record company, and he said they told him, they kept having him writing like these stupid surfer songs, so he wrote Heroin in response. I thought that was just a cool artist like dope ass thing to do. He's like, the response was, hey, he was like, say I got something for you. They said it's never gonna happen. It's never gonna like twice in a row. I just thought that was a cool artist story to tell about the backdrop of that record. And also it says Tucker stopped drumming for several seconds at the 5:17 mark before picking up the beat again, because their transitions and everything was just so amazing. He was like, as soon as it got too loud and fast, he couldn't hear anything. So he couldn't hear anybody, so he just thought they stopped playing. And once he realized that they were still playing, he just picked up again on the drums. I thought that was another cool background story. That leads into There She Goes Again, and it's pretty much a song about a prostitute. And it's sung in this almost, again, it's still 67, so me saying old rock and old stuff like that is just putting it in the times, but it does sound like an old rock pop sound, maybe close to like blues, just getting out that era. It sounds like that, which is, very ironic that it was like this pop song, but it was talking about a prostitute. Sort of like Roxanne, you don't have to turn on the red light. That leads into I'll Be Your Mirror, which is kind of a self-reflecting song. And one of the lines that stood out to me was, I find it hard to believe you don't know the beauty that you are, but if you don't, let me be your eyes, a hand in the darkness so you won't be afraid. I was like, that was a nice line to throw in this album that's just so heavy, dark driven, kind of artsy thing in a way. I just thought that was a good thing. The album ends with the last two songs, Black Angel Death, which gives me like this Beatles kind of record sound in a way, and European song. And that was dedicated to Delmore Schwartz, who was a poet, who was a mentor to Reed at the time. Well, prior to that. So they just dedicated a record to him, which is pretty cool. Let me get into my favorite songs. I'm going to go with Femme Fatale, Venus in Fur, and All Tomorrow's Parties. Worst song, Black Angel's Death song. It's too much on the ear for me. Like I can't really like find myself like going back to listen to it. It's just too much on the ear for me. Like it's too much for me. It's probably somebody else's favorite song. Somebody's gonna comment like, but that's my favorite song. But it's just too much on the ears for me. The favorite line, I said it already, but it's when Nico just goes, you're written in her book, you're number 37, have a look. Like that line always stood out to me. She's gonna break your heart in two. What a clown. Rating fucks given for this, I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5. I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5 fucks given, for reasons I'll mention in my recap. So let's wrap this shit up. In closing, the Velvet Underground and Nico album, I think obviously it was ahead of its time. It's just obviously, like if any album was ahead of its time, it was this one. I think this inspired a lot of indie rock pop kind of bands. To not even have a plaque for records sold for anything is kind of nuts. That an album this influential has garnished that influence without selling the records, which goes to show again, I repeat, that maybe you just don't need to, you don't have to be this commercial selling all these records and things of that nature to influence a whole generation and generations after that. So that's just pretty cool. The album cover is fucking amazing, iconic. Like that painting is just so everywhere. But to have Andy Warhol be your producer and fund you, and one of the greatest artists of all time do your album cover is fucking insane. Pardon my language, but it is fucking insane. And the subject matter alone to be made in 1966, released in 1967, is just ahead of its time. It leads to the ahead of its time, I think, again. So like heroin use, again, prostitution, S&M, that's not the same song. Yeah. Just to touch on these subjects, or going up to Harlem and finding your drug dealer, or depression, or paranoia, and self-reflection, and you should find your beauty in yourself, like on the Mirror record. It was just a great combination of things to have in one album, and I just don't think, I was born in 1990, so I don't know, but it just feels like the world wasn't ready for that yet. But they wasn't ready for all that yet. Are you a cop? But I just think it was really great and a really great album, and that's pretty much it. And I'm glad Rolling Stone did one great thing and had me find this album, and when I revisited it recently, it still held up to the prestige that I thought it had. So yeah, that's pretty much it. But as always, fuck this review. I'm Tatum. Peace. And it's still 316.